Welcome back to the show here. An interesting topic that I came across, I want to say yesterday, around this time actually, while I was doing the show. It just kind of popped up on my phone how the NFL was thinking about incorporating the face mask calls and, the idea of using replay assistant on, these face mask calls and how that could be incorporated in 2025. I read up on it a little bit more today, and basically NFL executives met today, or actually met yesterday, excuse me, for the December league meetings, and one of the major talking points was the replay assistant. The replay assistant, which has been implemented more this season to help refs come to a decision. And currently, as it stands, replay assistant can help officials pick up a flag that was incorrectly thrown or assist in proper enforcement of a foul that was called. So, if somebody throws a flag out there and the replay assistant sees it, they could tell the officials, hey, that wasn't really a foul, pick it up, it doesn't need to be called, right? And things of that nature, right? And at the league meeting, there was an emphasis on face mask penalties that have not been called this season, some pretty egregious ones, and it leads to sometimes, in some of these face mask calls, it could have led to some game-altering, game-changing moments, like on Thursday Night Football, right? On Thursday here tonight, there was no face mask called on Sam Darnold against the Los Angeles Rams. Funny enough, how Darnold was escaping the end zone, I'm pretty sure, also, and one of the defensive linemen basically just yanked his face mask back, and it looked so obvious on replay and all the different angles that we saw of it, right? How his helmet literally turned to the side, and basically Sam Darnold's face was in the spot where his ear should be, and still there was no call, right? The refs made the point that they didn't see it, that they physically didn't see it, so they couldn't call it or, couldn't do anything about it, when it was pretty obvious that, it was obviously it was a face mask. And because of that, in that game, it was called a safety, and the Vikings were basically, negated a chance to come back in that game. That was Sam Darnold's moment to orchestrate a game-winning drive and kind of bring his team back fully, but because of the no call, everything was ruined. So that was obviously a big moment in that in this regard. Then you had a moment on October the 3rd between the Buccaneers and the Falcons. I believe on Thursday Night Football again. There was not a face mask called on Bucky Irving during one of his runs that would have set up a field goal attempt for the Buccaneers to potentially win that game. But instead, a holding call was called on that same drive, on that same play. So, because the referees didn't see the face mask call, they did see the holding call. So they called a holding on the Buccaneers, and it put them out of field goal range. And then in the end, the Falcons ended up winning. Now, that one's a bit more, stretched out, but it apparently was a pretty obvious call, and at worst, it would have negated the holding call. They would have set a penalty on both sides, and they would have just replayed the down. But the fact that it was only on the Buccaneers is a problem, right? Because they should have called the face mask in that instance. Then, just this past Monday, the Bengals didn't lose, but they almost lost because of the face mask on Joe Burrow when he got sacked, and it was clearly, clear enough for Zach Taylor to see it and for everybody else to see it, but all the officials didn't see it in that moment, so they didn't call it. And the Bengals did punt, and lucky for them, the Cowboys handed it back to them. But, that could have been a big moment, right? That's because face masks are obviously like a personal foul, 15 yards and an automatic first down. At that point, the Bengals could have won the game right there, and instead they punted away. And I know it didn't go how it typically does for the Cowboys to get the ball back because of the fumble, but they could have ended up losing that game. And then in hindsight, when you look back on it, all you get from the NFL and the referees is like, our bad, we missed the call, it was obviously a face mask, we're sorry. And a lot of times, in these instances where the Rams are technically still fighting for the playoffs, that does them no good. That doesn't do them anything, right? For the refs to kind of acknowledge it after the fact, their season's over and now they can't do anything about it. So, the severity of that call is obviously a huge thing, and I don't want to dump all of it on the refs because they obviously do a lot. And, here or there you can miss a call, but there's been some pretty egregious ones, egregious enough for the NFL to kind of bring this up at the league meeting on Wednesday, yesterday. So, the NFL Executive Vice President of Football Operations, Troy Vincent, told reporters that the face mask penalties could be a subject for replay assistant in 2025, which would be a massive change for the NFL because not only has the NFL always been pretty hesitant and pretty doubtful about subjective plays, being reviewable, right? Like pass interferences or things like that. They don't really feel too comfortable, for that to be reviewed, right? Because everybody sees it differently. So it would just make the game even longer, if anything. But also, the fact that it has never been allowed, the NFL has never allowed replay to determine that there indeed was a foul, right? The NFL has never allowed it where, there was a foul, it wasn't called, but because you use replay, now you could throw the flag. That's never been something the NFL has done. If it wasn't called, it wasn't called, and the review can't really do anything, even if it's so obvious and you look at the review and see that it actually is a penalty. It's too obvious not to be called a penalty. Currently, the NFL isn't allowed to then throw a flag, right? But if they incorporated this, right, it would obviously change that, right? Because if you miss a face mask call and then you see it on the replay review and the replay assistant comes in, he tells the officials, hey, you guys might have missed a face mask here. I don't know if that would send them to go look it over or if the replay assistant would just say, yeah, it was a face mask, call it. I don't know what the protocol would be there, but it looks like, with these calls being so important most of the time, it looks like it could change the trajectory of the traditional way that the NFL has called, these flags or non-flags on the field. So it would be a big deal because, it is. I think face masks aren't so subjective to like pass interferences. I don't think those should be reviewable. A lot of the times because the refs are right there. So if it's down the sidelines, either sideline or down the middle of the field, there's always officials there. So I think that's also something that I don't really want reviewed. But face masks are pretty easily determined, right? If your hand's in the guy's face, it's kind of hard to be subjective about that, right? You can only have your hand near a guy's face mask or just near their face in general where it's not a face mask. So I think those would be pretty easy to determine. But, thinking about holding calls and offensive pass interference, offsides, neutral zone infractions, I think their officials are pretty much on top of all those types of fouls. So I don't think those should be reviewable. But a face mask is simple enough or obvious enough where I think using replay would be an actual helpful thing. Because also, you don't want to overdo it and be in a situation where it's kind of fun to see the gamesmanship of, the fact that the refs do miss some calls, right? I always thought it was so cool and kind of funny how defensive backs, because their job is super difficult, right, to stay and mirror a wide receiver step for step, that they wear the opposing team's gloves, the color of their gloves, so that they blend in and they can kind of get away with a few more, calls like that. And I think that's the kind of gamesmanship and, the game within the game that makes it pretty fascinating, right? Because if those are always called and reviewed, then these games would stop and start as quickly as like NBA games, and nobody has time for that. So I think you can't overdo it, but face masks are obvious enough and significant enough where using the replay, I think, would just make it a lot more helpful and there wouldn't be so many of these situations where, the refs are getting called out and they're getting called into question and things like that. They're already doing a lot, so they don't need all this, complaining on top of it. So face masks, yes, everything else can pretty much stay the same. I think face masks is definitely something that needs to be held, to the strictest of, efficiency. I would put it as. So, we'll see if it comes in 2025. They also mentioned at this meeting that they're going to review the onside kick rule because basically it doesn't do anything. So that's something else that they could alter come next year. But that's a long ways away. And actually, speaking of next year, this next segment has to do with next year in 2025 because we're going to have a quick discussion on Shedeur Sanders, projected to be one of, if not the best quarterback in next year's NFL draft. So, looking at the draft order right now, where does he fit in better? The Giants, who hold the number 1 overall pick, or the Las Vegas Raiders at number 2? We're going to talk about that, my thoughts on it, and where I think Shedeur would not only fit better, but I think where he would have the most success in the NFL, at least to start his career. So we'll be right back. That segment is coming up next.